There was a play on Broadway called Spamalot. Their catchphrase on other shows was, "And now for something completely different." And that probably applies to me as well as anyone, because you're probably not going to have another rocket engineer who worked on the space shuttle come up and talk about business and entrepreneurship. Following those days, I had a job in Washington, D.C., where I was Joint Department of Defense and NASA, where my job was to fly around the United States, talk to entrepreneurs, talk to small businesses, figure out what makes them tick, and come back and try to see if anyone in the government actually understood any of it. After leaving there, after a while, everyone I worked with pretty much retired from the government. No one knew what to do with me, so all the stuff I was doing on the side became its own business in mostly publishing, information gathering, research on markets. What I'm currently doing now is managing stock indices that compete against things like the S&P 500. So if you're wondering how you get from being an engineer and doing this sort of work to managing stock indices, the answer is a wrong phone call. There's actually, just so you know, the thing I handed out is a lot of the things I've picked up over the years as far as lesson learned for entrepreneurs. So currently I manage what's called the SPADE Defense Index. SPADE coming from SPA as space and DE from defense, which is then licensed, so it follows the same model as the music industry, to a company called PowerShares, which is one of the 4 largest operators of these funds. And they have what's called the PowerShares Aerospace and Defense portfolio, which tracks the index. Whenever anybody invests in the index, a small percentage comes back to me for licensing fees. Probably one of the most important lessons you can learn is that statistically, the first venture, whatever you come up with, it's going to fail. 75% of everything, of every business started by an entrepreneur fails. Actually, if you probably look hardcore, the answer is it's probably higher than that, but that's what they use. And you have to be flexible, because what you think you know the angle you want isn't necessarily the angle you're going to get. I mean, as I said, I made a wrong phone number and ended up talking to a VP who said, "Here, let's go ahead and do this." And this has now become a real business. And I can look through a lot of the different projects that I've done over time, and things just sort of, you start in a direction and then it doesn't quite go there. And just so you know, there's a lot of people, regardless of what you're trying to do, I don't want to go and say famous people, but if you say, here are the 5 top people in this field, a lot of them will actually take your phone calls. The 2 things you have to remember is, don't say, "I've got an idea for you," because they don't want to hear it. They get tons of these things. If you call up and say, "Hi, I'm looking for a mentor, I'm thinking of starting this, can you do," if they're interested, they'll let you know. But more than likely, they'll be able to pass you on to someone else. And there are people who, I'm crossing my fingers, the potential head of NASA, who's one of the short lists to run the agency, is a retired general who ran the Marine Corps, who flew in space a couple of times. And how does he know me? Because we were chatting in the parking lot after a conference. He's like, "You know, you're the only one who actually came up and asked a question." And now, years later, he may very well be running the agency. And so you got to be flexible, because the stuff that's going on, and there's things that you're going to want to pursue that are just for the fun of it. There's a term I learned later in life which actually applies to most entrepreneurs. And just so you know, my former next door neighbor where I went to school, which was Rensselaer Polytech in outside Albany, New York, was the dean of the School of Management. And he and I, for years, always used to chat about various things. And he said, engineering was a great background for business and entrepreneur, because all they teach you how to do is solve problems. It's to look at something and then figure out. Years later, I found out there's actually a term for this, which is called scenario modeling. Scenario modeling is almost like science fiction. You're thinking of creating a business, whether it's music or whatever. Think of the wide variety of possibilities, from the far left to the far right. What if I give away everything for free? What if I charge $10,000? How does the business change over time? And you can pick any topic. It's a very big thing, like governments, large corporations all do this. They say, we are going to, your presentation was on shaving. What if the entire market decides no longer to use razors, but they use electric razors? Is there a market for this? What if everybody decides that this thing that they advertise on TV that flips and sharpens your razor, does that mean more people go back to razors? Look at the entire spectrum. What if beards become the new hot fashion and 90% of the people have beards? Is anyone going to shave? So if you have all of these factors considered, well then, regardless of how things change over time, you can adjust what you're doing to meet whatever's going on. No matter what's going on in your head, your idea is not unique. There's 1,000 people out there with the same idea. At the end of the day, it comes down to execution. If you're going to talk to someone and ask for their advice and stuff, they don't have a lot of time. You have to be able to explain things very quickly, very clearly. This is a presentation on people don't shave properly. If you're tired of cutting your face shaving, we have the solution. If someone's interested, they immediately know what you're doing. There's a lot of proposals that we used to read, and I wish I would have written them down because they would have made a great comedy book, because their section on commercial potential would be like the intermediate manifestation of, it was just like they threw together these whole big words talking about stuff, and then the last line would be, the commercial potential is obvious. And I would look at it and go, I don't even know what they're manufacturing. From a venture standpoint, anything you do, they're going to assume that whatever you're talking about, you have the capability of doing. They're not even going to pay attention. You come up with any idea whatsoever. The answer is, we assume they sent us the proposal, more than likely they have the capability. They're going to flip to the back and say, okay, do I think this actually can make money or not? So then when the pile is this high, you're now in the pile that's this high, then they will actually look at it and say, okay, who are these people? Do they really have the capability of doing this? Lawyers are actually pretty important. If you're dealing with people, get it on paper. If you're dealing with venture capitalists, because not every idea is unique, there's ways of giving them a little bit of information without giving them everything. If you're starting out on your own, there's a lot of things inside of the tax code that you may not even realize that suddenly reduce your taxable income to zero. And so the government is sort of, by doing this, you can suddenly bring in $50,000, $60,000 a year in revenues and not have to pay any taxes. So it makes sense to actually do some research. There was a great magazine at one point, Business 2.0, things like that are great because they'll have 100 stories from 100 different companies. You'll find 5 or 10 that you want. One of the steps everybody who's an entrepreneur should take is to go back and figure out exactly how much money do you actually need to be able to go forward. There's like a 6-month rule. If you're going to give it 6 months, do you have enough money? Do you have enough resources to be able to go 6 months? And then constantly keep reviewing that to say how far can you push that 6 months to. And eventually you may get to the point where you say, this is self-sustaining, I'm fine.